Erick Godsey, welcome back to the Thought Room.
It feels so good to be back. I was reflecting on it yesterday. Every time I do a podcast with you, it's a banger. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this is going to be.
You are officially, as of this interview, the most repeated guest on the Thought Room. You've been invited back. This is your third time. And we have to give the people what they want. They always want more Erick Godsey. So I'm delighted once again to have you. And it's been amazing as your friend to observe your immense and catalyzed growth. I want to just acknowledge that, and the way that I see you stepping up. I feel like I'm always saying that, but it's just like, man, if anyone knew you a year ago or 2 years ago, just how exponentially things have gone for you. And that's not a mistake. You know, you really are a leader and you practice what you preach, and you're very dedicated. You're very disciplined. You have an incredibly astute scientific mind. And also, you know, you're a really deep feeler too. So that's such a gift to knit those things together and to offer that medicine to the world. So I'm so very grateful to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And exactly what you are articulating feels like it's actually what is currently causing pretty massive tension in my life. I just finished writing my Feasting Friday newsletter before you got over here, and I was reflecting that like the last 3 or 4 newsletters is me talking about crying because of the stuff that I feel like for the first time in my life, I'm starting to wake up to aspects of our culture and how I've contributed to it that I've been disassociated from my entire life, and that because of whatever that force is inside of me that to the outside looks like leadership and dedication and this exponential growth is also the thing that is terrifying me because of what I'm learning. I can feel myself getting emotional now because I can feel that like the dreams that I created for myself as, you know, like a young man was from that place of disassociation. And we can get into the details of what that is in a little bit, and that I can feel my adolescent dreams having to like dissolve and transform. And my dreams are why I do the hard things, why I am as dedicated as I am. And it feels like I'm in this interesting moment where the catalyzing future heaven that I strive for is actually dissolving. But I know that if I can just keep the path while it's dissolving, a new, more beautiful heaven will emerge. But I'm in the thick of the muck of the transition between dreams right now.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's that ephemeral space of the unknown, right? And that deep trust. And life can be really simple when we have a clear why, right? When you have that dream, it's crystal. It's like you said, it's that fuel that's driving us to get up and do all of the things, whatever the actions are. We have that dream in mind. And when the dream is shifting, or like you said, becoming awake to these aspects of our identity that were maybe built on falsehood, it's incredibly confronting. Yeah. Are you willing to speak to what the dreams were and how you see it shifting now?
Yeah. So I've had some form of a dream from my life since I, began having dreams for my life, which started around like 18 or 19, that essentially involved create some Nobel Prize winning psychotherapy, and then having a beautiful house on the edge of a lake where I can go be a father and a husband. And I've imagined my beautiful cloistered library with the podcast in the middle and my children's shoes by the door. But there was this felt assumption that that dream was embedded inside of a cultural context that is more or less the same as it is now, and that would be stable enough for me to have this desire to, I want to be a husband and a father first, and then, provide my work to the world in a way that's helpful. But it was still ultimately like, I'm a part of an economic system that I'm starting to see is not viable long-term. I'm a part of a relationship to nature that is sacrilegious and not viable long-term. And that with the exponential rise of technology alongside the further and further divisiveness of how social media is warping our understanding of what the world is, that dream feels like it's naive, and that the aspects of it that I love are still possible, but the context in which it's embedded is not.
This feels very weighted, like that awareness. For me, at least, when you say it, I feel a great deal of emotion and responsibility.
That's the word.
Yeah. So how are you navigating that?
With super constricted muscles in my upper back the last couple of days that have kept me from being able to work out, that I know are psychosomatically related to literally feeling a burden on my back.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of interesting aspects to this. I playfully have said it to you multiple times that I have a huge ego. And if I'm not being self-critical or lighthearted to the point of actually not saying the truth, what it is that I feel exceptionally capable in specific areas of life, and that I feel capable, and that I also feel called to rise to whatever the most important problem is that resonates with my Daemon. And for a long time, I thought that was psychotherapy embedded inside of a cultural context that was stable. Recently, in the last 5 weeks, I've been, my Daemon has called me to really connect to my personal and cultural disassociation from nature in a way that someone told me it's called eco grief, but it's that when you first kind of start to wake up to, if the planet is a sentient living creature, and it's making me emotional now, and you feel into what I am a part of every day, and how that thing interacts with this living creature that is fundamentally our mother. It's heavy.
Yeah.
And then that has slowly brought me to begin to, it's brought me to this thing that's called existential risk theory, which is there's essentially a group of philosophers, and none of them have written books yet over this idea as far as I know of, because it's kind of the bleeding edge of what the smartest people are thinking about. Not the smartest, but the people concerned with where our culture is going. And that if you look at how we are operating, they essentially break it down to we've evolved to play the game of life fundamentally as rivals, that we are independent gene survival machines competing with other independent gene survival machines for finite resources within a finite environment, and that we've evolved to play that way. And there's a whole, evolutionary biology argument that is really clear. But once you introduce exponential technology, which has slowly come on the scene in the last couple hundred years, which in evolutionary time is a second,
Right.
that if you do the equation of rivalrous game theory dynamics plus exponential technology, it equals high likelihood of self-extinction. Mm-hmm. And that they call this whole equation game A. And they're trying to envision what would be called game B. And we don't know what that looks like. It's not communism. It's not socialism. It has not originated yet. And I have been obsessed in a way where I've gotten kind of manic. And Graham is behind the recording, and he is my roommate, and he's seen the dedication and excitement and grief and burden and slight mania. And what's interesting is, and there's a bunch of threads here, but it feels like the type of psychotherapy that I am being called to help articulate is the type of psychotherapy that would be in alignment with what these philosophers are imagining game B would be. And that what what the obsession is the last couple of weeks is essentially to understand game A and game B well enough so that I can begin to put myself through whatever the techniques and practices and disciplines would be to begin to cultivate the type of consciousness that could operate in game B. And I'm feeling how hard it's going to be.
Yeah.
And by hard, I mean like how transformational it's going to be. Because our genes have evolved to create meat suits that have egos that operate under game A dynamics. That's how we are programmed. And something has happened, and some people would say aliens, other people would say mushrooms, but something has happened in our development where we have gotten to the point where we have conscious forethought, which allows for the opportunity to choose to act in a way that is not purely the results of the programming of our genes.
Right.
Like the fact that people can choose to be celibate or choose to not reproduce is a fundamental example that we now have this capability. And I can just feel that like it's simultaneously the most exciting thing that I feel like I've ever found. It also feels like the heaviest responsibility that I've ever, or that I can feel it's slowly coming online. And we were talking about it before we got on the podcast, but I have enough spiritual awareness to feel that I've spent an unbalanced amount of time on the puzzle, and I haven't relaxed into the truth of like what a really good cup of coffee in the morning with someone you care about feels like.
Right.
What a first kiss with someone after having not seen them for a long time feels like.
Right.
Like I can feel that I'm out of balance with the poet.
Yeah.
And
Presence.
I'm trying to find the balance between, the Dr. Manhattan inside of me and the poet.
Beautiful. So I'm just going to back this up and kind of recap for myself. We've got this game theory. Theory A, or game A, essentially is that we end up destroying ourselves as a species with the help of catalyzed technology that's going out of control. And we're basically in this rat race to just get our essential needs met, even though there's no real survival threat against one another, right? It's just that animal brain kind of taking over and eventually destroying us. Game B is this big question mark for the future. We don't know what it looks like, but what I'm hearing is there's this new like portal or pocket or opportunity or timeline opening up where we're not at each other's throats. We don't have to always be taking. There's this idea of giving and reciprocity. And, I think I looked at your computer. It said like bodhisattva, which is the awakened being. So this idea that we're not living in a scarcity mindset. There's more than enough. We live in an abundant universe. This isn't the way that we're raised. We're really raised to like go through those milestones, get the next thing, graduate, go to college if you can, get a job, settle down, have a family, put your white picket fence around your home so that other people don't get in. This is mine. Put my stake in the ground. And we're being invited into a new paradigm right now. But it's happening so fast that the structures in our brains and everything in our DNA is being confronted, is being challenged by this new wave. That's pretty dope.
Yeah.
But what I want to ask you about is, it's very relatable to me, and I'm sure to others listening, this idea of seeing your mission. And you talked about the Daemon, which I actually would love for you to just extrapolate. Anyone who knows your work is probably familiar with that term, but some people listening might not have heard Daemon. Do you want to just expound on that for a second?
Absolutely. I believe that there is a force inside of you that is essentially like a sacred internal guidance system that knows what your destiny is. And by destiny, I mean my hypothesis is that there is a sacred song being played by the collective, and that each of us are a unique genetic instrument that has never existed before and will never exist again, that has a potential to add a song or a note to the song that only we can add. And that if we add that note to the sacred song of the collective, we not only will experience a life that is maximally meaningful, but we also contribute the greatest possible we are able to contribute to the well-being of the unfolding of the whole thing. And I use the word Daemon because I just love anything Greek. And
what's the root of it?
Right. So this is an incredible story, and I'll try to tell it in as concise a way as possible, but also still want to convey the meaning. But so Plato is regarded as one of the top OG philosophers of Western culture, and he wrote this book called the Republica. And, it's a philosophical treatise for how to create what he thought would be like the ultimate type of civilization. And it's this work of philosophy. And the very last chapter is this myth. And it's called the myth of E-R. And it's the story of there was a soldier that was deemed by the gods as being virtuous enough where when he died in battle that day, they allowed him to be able to go witness what happens after death and then to be able to come back and tell people about it. And the myth of is what he saw. And so when he died, he went to what is called the middle world. And in the middle world, there's 4 judges. And the judges essentially will judge a soul about whether or not it needs to acquire more wisdom. And that the lower world is where earth unfolds. And the upper world is what we would now call heaven, but I don't believe they used that word back then. And whenever a soul completes a soul cycle in either the upper or the lower world, they come to the middle world to be judged. And you acquire wisdom in the lower world. In the upper world, it's without strife, it's without suffering. And so you essentially stay there until your wisdom dissolves and you need to go back to learn. And so it's not about punishment. It's about, does this soul need to acquire more wisdom? And so every soul cycle, there's all these souls in front of these judges, and the judges will pick the ones that have to go acquire more wisdom. And the ones that are chosen as having to acquire more wisdom, they go on this pilgrimage to this rainbow tower that connects the upper world and the middle world and the lower world. And embedded in the rainbow tower in the middle world is this woman on a throne. And she's called the Queen of the Muses. And the Muses in the Greek culture were like kind of the arbiters of fate. And when these souls get to this queen, this queen has a priest. The queen doesn't speak directly, but the priest interprets the queen's like essence, because she's a god. She doesn't have to speak. And the priest aligns the souls in an order, and they come up to the throne and they pick from a bunch of different golden threads. Mm-hmm. And they're allowed to pick any thread, but the one rule is whatever thread you touch, that's the one that you have to live out in the lower world to acquire wisdom. And so the first soul that went was a soul that spent its last couple of lifetimes up in the upper world, so it had lost its wisdom. And so it picked the first thread that it saw had the most pleasure and power in it. And once it grabbed it, its fate was it would know riches and power more than any other soul during that time on earth, but it was going to become a dictator, and it would eventually have to eat its children.
Wow.
The last soul to go pick was Odysseus. And Odysseus from the Greek canon, was that hero that had to go through the Odyssey and went through so much pain and so much suffering. And he took his time looking at the threads, and he picked the thread of a simple farmer that would be able to go and raise a family in health, in the solitude and peace of nature. And once all the souls had picked their threads, they go into a cave underneath the throne to the river of forgetting, because the knowledge of their thread was too heavy for their soul to go into the lower world. So they drink from the river of forgetting until they forget. Mm. And then the queen of the muses gives them each a guardian angel or a guardian spirit. And their guardian spirit is this disembodied force that comes with them into the world, but knows their thread. And they called it the Daemon. Uh-huh. And so that's where we get the word the Daemon from. And Socrates was kind of my OG idol back when I was, a 19-year-old thinking like, I'm going to be the next Socrates. Mm. And he was dubbed the wisest person in Athens by the Oracle of Delphi, because he only listened to his Daemon. And the way that Plato described how Socrates described his Daemon, because Socrates didn't write, and this is an interesting side note we don't need to get into, but Socrates only experienced his Daemon as a voice saying what not to do. Huh. And the story of Socrates ends with Socrates basically does this thing where he starts to question all the most powerful people in the government of Athens publicly. And it got to the point where he was humiliating these people in front of, or they felt it was humiliating, because he would essentially ask them questions until they got to the point where they were tripping over themselves because they didn't know things. Right. And then he got charged by the government in power that he got charged for treason for quote unquote corrupting the youth. And the way the political system worked in Athens is you get charged with treason to basically make you leave. Like, they won't kill you unless you stay, but they give you a long enough period that was kind of the way that they exerted power. So the day before he was to have to go before these people and drink hemlock and die, all of his friends come to him in jail, and it's like, hey, we got you a boat. We can get you over to Egypt or wherever. Let's go. And Socrates tells them no. And there's this whole story that Plato writes about how Socrates explained why he wasn't going to leave. And it was because his Daemon said not to. And that he spent a couple of days like, really, Daemon? Like, really? And the next day he chose to drink the hemlock, and, and that, 4,000 years plus later, his example and his story still is here with us. And that maybe the Daemon knew, like, that was the way that golden thread needed to be played out. So that's the background. To anchor it in the modern sense. Every person I've ever spoke to, where I talk about, that like whisper inside of you, that when you do the right thing, like it tells you that was the right thing, and that when you do something was the wrong thing, it lets you know. Every single person knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I believe that like the core of whatever the psychotherapy is that I'm trying to birth into the world is essentially to help people cultivate their unique felt sense with that force, and then to begin the faith experiment of acting in accord with that voice. And, this brings us back to the beginning of the podcast, but the outside felt perception of my exponential growth is because for the last 3.5 years, I've made a spiritual commitment to, if I hear that voice, I do what it asks.
Yeah.
And it's why I've been crying for the last 5 weeks. It's because I feel that voice saying, all right, boy, you're ready. Yeah. Eat this, learn this. Yeah. And like, as I'm learning it, I'm just like, fuck, okay.
Going back to what you said before and the question that I started about what you're saying is going to resonate with so many people, I believe, because like you said, all of us have that whisper, whatever name we put on it, whether it's higher self, God, intuition, Daemon, everyone knows what you're talking about. And what does one do when, like yourself, the mission feels so big that the body is wearing it like this weight on our shoulders? And to throw it back to what you've now discovered and shared is the next piece of your journey, which feels like the embodiment, like bringing in, how do we take these wild and wonderful philosophical and esoteric concepts and anchor them into this reality to create that game B, awakened self? So what do we do with, that burden that we might be feeling around a really large mission? And maybe you don't have the answer yet. And I like that. That's great. But share about your process of transmuting that.
Right. So as you were asking the question, in my mind, I was like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I love that you intuitively brought it to exactly where I was going to go, which is, but here's the process. One of the greatest books that I think has been written in the last 10 years that could be seen as an allegory for how to follow the Daemon is The Line Tracker's Guide to Life by Boyd Vardy. And one of the quotes from that book that I love so much is, I don't know where we're going, but I know how we're going to get there. And that's exactly how I fucking feel right now. And I don't know where I'm going, but I know how I'm going to get there. And I'm going to get there by having a daily practice of cultivating the felt sense of what my body wants to express emotionally. That's why I cry so goddamn much. And then to earnestly be truthful. And what that means is, truth is something that we can argue all day about whether anyone has any access to capital T truth. But to be truthful means to genuinely and authentically express reality as you currently experience and see it. And so it begins with being truthful with myself. And it's why I journal. And it's why I pray. And it's why I talk to this thing, can I be truthful with myself? Like, wow, I feel overwhelmed. Wow, I feel lost. Wow, I feel excited. I can feel that there's something here. And then can you be truthful with the people closest to you? And this is incredibly more complex and complicated when you're dealing with someone else's interpretation of your truthfulness. But can you be truthful with the people closest to you? And so that's like the conversation that you and I had before the podcast. It's the actual act of doing this podcast and the way that we do it. Having even one person around you that you can be truthful with and that they will receive you is a huge part of the mental health revolution that I'm seeing is incredibly vital. And we can get into the details if we want to. And then the next stage, which is the one that I haven't even got to yet because it's incredibly, incredibly hard, is how can you be truthful about what is happening in the world. And I think this is where most people are absolutely either paralyzed or completely hijacked by forces that we could get into. But the existential risk philosophers, what they call this is sense making. And it's hard enough to try to find the truthfulness between you and your closest romantic partner about what's happening between y'all. And you are directly experiencing that every day. It's an entire exponentially more difficult attempt to try to make sense of what's happening in the other part of the world that you're seeing on your news feed. And that's something that we might not even want to get into on this podcast. And then the fourth truthfulness, which actually might be the first one in this process, is trying to be in truth with nature. And that's the one that I can feel that the balancing between what I'm being called to do with my books and my screens will be balanced by just simply making the time to get out into nature and just listen to the truth of whatever the environment is that I'm in. And so that's my process, plus the 10-year cultivation that I've created of learning. You know, like I have this whole ritual that I do like every day where for 3 or 4 hours, phones on airplane mode, I'm creating mind maps or taking copious notes, reading books, trying to put things together. And then for me, it's to then share it. You know, like that, like the way that I alchemize is to create the art of sharing my experience. And so that's my process, you know, to try to be in truth on those levels, and then to make art and to cry.
I'm going to challenge you here for a second. Are you open to that? Okay. So a lot of people listening know you as this, you're book smart, you're just incredibly, you're an amazing writer, you're very highly intellectual. And the theme of this podcast seems to be like this new way of the future is about leading from the heart, right? And quite literally overriding our defaults. So one of your defaults is like you're this incredibly smart man who can connect all these threads. And that's great. And we have lots of podcasts out there of you doing just that and serving in the way that you serve best. I want to invite you right now to slow down and to be in touch with that Daemon, with what you said about your body knowing what it wants to express. And if you could lead by example for all those listening about how we get in touch with that and how we let it out and speak from that place. And tell us what's alive.
The first thing that I feel is my heart rate increase. I feel my eyes getting watery. And I can feel, so I had a vision the other day that feels like it represents what it feels like I need right now. Have you seen the movie Midsummer?
Remind me.
It's like a horror movie, but it's...
No.
The most potent scene of that entire movie is the main character, who is a woman. She just experienced like the deepest betrayal, the most hurt. And you can feel the entire movie that she hasn't been expressing like her pain. And she like runs away from the group and goes into her room but she's followed by all these women who see her as like the new leader. And she just starts crying. And all of the women intuitively begin to hyperventilate in the same way that she's hyperventilating. And then they begin to cry with her crying. And then the main character moves from crying to screaming, and they're all screaming on their hands and knees with her, just screaming and screaming.
Wow.
And it feels like what my nervous system wants is to be able to be the little boy in a community of people that he feels safe with and just fucking weep. And to have the community weep with him. And I can feel that a part of the burden that I feel is in my community, because of the way that I show up. I am the space holder, and I can feel that I don't feel safe that they can hold my weakness. And I know that that's not the right word, but my vulnerability. And that I can feel that me feeling that is because I haven't given them the opportunity. And I have resistance to allowing myself to receive that. But I can feel that that's what my heart wants.
If you can get in touch with that aspect of you that has the resistance, maybe it's a younger part of yourself. There's a fear there about what happens if you really let go deeply. What is that?
I can feel that the block begins in childhood, that I had a relationship with my primary caretaker where since I was like 5, I was the space holder. And that one was not reliable because of their absence, and the other one was not reliable because of their inability to hold others' emotions without unconsciously making it about them not being good enough, and that the expression of my unstable emotions would be evidence of their inadequacy. Mm-hmm. And so from a very early age, it felt like I don't even have a memory of expressing any emotion that wasn't held, but the felt sense to my nervous system was that was just not acceptable. And so I actually don't know what would happen on the other side.
It's pretty common, I think, because I share this too, being the space holder in my circles as well, and that sense of occasional burden and isolation around the heaviness of that. And like you said, fear that others won't be able to hold it. And the distortion, I believe, is a story that's created that we're actually protecting the people that we love by not having that large emotional expression. Because if our mind has assessed fairly or unfairly that they cannot hold our pain, then it becomes, well, I'm doing this out of love for them and for myself because they won't really be able to hold it. And in that story, innate within it is that thread of separation that is game A, that says I have to keep my stuff separate from their stuff. I can't show my vulnerability because what I have can be taken or broken or used against me. So this is the embodiment of the new paradigm. And I thank you so much for bringing that and sharing that.
I want to acknowledge the incredible insight that you just offered me at the end, that it is a function of game A. And the two things that I feel arise is, the first one is, it feels like I have this thread in my emotional landscape that started when I was 7. And it felt like when I was 7 and I was first kind of exposed to the idea of heaven and the afterlife and the really watered down Wisconsin small town version of Christianity that was given to me, I started to feel like what eternity means. And it began this feeling of, it feels like I can see the echoes or the coming of a thing that, if witnessed, like destroys you in awe. It's kind of hard to articulate, but it's like, I constantly have doodles of this super small stick figure standing in front of this massive, massive orb thing. And it feels like what I'm looking at, if it were accepted, would bring the same responsibility and burden to all the people who are close to me. And it does feel like it's a protective thing of the people that I care about, with this weird and beautiful commitment to slowly and poetically titrate what I see in a way that can slowly, because there's this idea in psychotherapy that if you see someone's trauma, like in the first session, you don't show it to them because it could break them.
Right.
And there's been case histories of like that can create psychosis. And that what a good psychotherapist will do is slowly, without directing, but gently guiding the people to their own inner resources that will then help them come to the trauma when their ego is solid enough to be transformed by it. And if you do it sooner, it can lead to psychosis. And I totally own that there is a part of the not sharing that is my blockage around my unique traumas. But there also feels like there's a genuine, intelligent grace with how I'm sharing what I'm learning. And then there's this other part that I'm feeling that might be super juicy to get into, but it feels like when I begin to explain what I'm starting to sense and see with this game A, game B thing, when I share it with quote unquote spiritual people or quote unquote conscious people, the primary response is to what feels like spiritually bypass, talking about like, you know, this is the great reset, or the people who are ready are going to be the ones that make it through, or, you know, this is humanity's end, and the best that we can do is be a steward for that transition to go peacefully. Whatever the story is, the energy that I'm feeling in the moment is what you're articulating doesn't mean what you think it means. And I don't have to change my story about how I'm living my life and what I'm doing. And so there's this slight sense of gaslighting, feels like too strong of a word, but it feels like the couple of people who I've shared this with, who are not immediately in my circle and intuitively grasp my earnestness and my thoughtfulness around this type of stuff, that's been the primary like meme immune response that their reality tunnel has. And it's been an interesting thing to feel into.
When you're saying this, I'm being brought back to the drinking the water of forgetting. What was it? The river of forgetting?
Yeah, the river of forgetting.
And this idea of like forgetting and remembering, and how sometimes living in this experience, this game, if you will, it gets very intense. And I know for myself, there are periods of being more awake and then periods of going back to sleep. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really cool to think about that on the macro, and then also this actual idea of sleep and how, sometimes I consider that. I'm like, wait, sleep is so normal because you are born knowing about sleep. Sleeping is a thing that happens. It's just a given. There's all the science behind it. But like on a consciousness level, I'm like, does anybody else really think about the fact that for a third of the day, we don't really know like what is fully happening, like what our consciousness is doing, what we're traversing. Yeah. And like, it's just so accepted. And I'm like, this is a third of our life. Like, wow. Like think about this mystical space. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, on like, I kind of think that I gave you that book a long time ago, The Kinevada. Do you remember that book?
I love it.
Isn't that such a good book?
It's so good.
So for anyone listening who is not aware of this book, The Kinevada, I think it's The Kinevada are Waiting for You or something like that. It's Dorothy Bryant. And the premise is there's this group of people, indigenous group of people, and they live their waking life in order to promote good dreaming. So everything they do, everything they eat, every word that's spoken or more often not spoken is to promote this idea that they're priming themselves for beautiful sleep, because they believe that in the dream state that's the real reality. That's the important work. So I kind of love that premise. And I know this is a sideline here, but just what are your thoughts on what could actually be going on in our dream space? And for myself, deepening my dream work. And I know for you, and you've been studying Jung for so long, it's like, maybe we're just getting onto something about the magic of what can actually be done in the dream space. Yeah. Because now, I don't know, I'll speak for myself and then I want to hear from you, but especially since opening up plant medicine, my dreams have been characterized by a different signature. Yeah. And oftentimes I'll have a certain type of dream, if you want to call it a dream, but I'm in the space, and I say the space because it's like the medicine space. It's the place where my consciousness expands and I lose all borders, but I'm still watching and I can feel things happening. I can feel things moving. Sometimes I'm lucid enough to feel physical adjustments happening in my body. So deep breaths happening. I'll feel a pop in my sternum, but I'm still asleep, but like lucid. And sometimes I'll get a thread of what it's emotionally connected to. Last night I know I was in that space, but all I remember was two things. One was the word clearing. I feel like I had big clearings happening from my body last night. And I had come from, like I told you, a dessert and bodywork party that my friend Jason Niemer hosted. And I don't think I've ever melted so deeply into the bodywork that I was experiencing last night, and just really just receiving touch and shutting my mind off and feeling all this pain release from my body. And so I think that continued into my sleep. It's like we plug our batteries in and it's just like things are recharging and we're not even conscious, because I think about that river of forgetting. It's like, maybe that's a space where our pain gets to splash around and like sort of make more sense to us and open up in these ways that still that don't become completely conscious, but are just like it's like that's a soup that's stirring in the background. So the first thing for me was clearing. And then the second thing was I woke up with this gnosis that myself and my current partner, Judd, are going to be putting out a creation and offering together. I don't remember the threads of what it was, but it felt like they were seeds that were planted in my consciousness. So I'm curious about, your thoughts on all of this.
Wow. The first thing that came up that was really interesting, I was like, oh, we are of nature, and a third of our existence is to be asleep. And there's this idea in the conscious community of being asleep equals bad.
Right.
And that I could feel that I was operating under that as I was telling the story right before you shared that. And where the reason I said, oh, I know where you're going, it actually isn't where you went. But I could feel that where I went at the beginning was like, can I relax into the elegance and the grace that a part of how I am designed is to have bouts of being asleep.
Yes.
And then I can feel in these last like 4 or 5 weeks, I've been hyper awake in the point where it's actually harmed my sleep, and my dreams have been very sparse.
Yes.
And it feels like intuitively I can feel that I'm like a week away from being far enough on the map that I'm working on that it's going to be like, okay, now it's off season. I don't know how long that's going to last, but that if I can relax into the season of sleeping and dreaming, that repairing and healing will happen, because I can feel even physiologically in my body, like my muscles are constricted. I can feel this like tightening in my upper back. I haven't slept well in a while, surprise. And that it feels like I'm being called into that stage. So that was the first thing that I picked up. To kind of like feel into the question of like what dreams are, what are they doing? I mean, that's ultimately one of the most interesting things about existence to me. And it's something that I've been pursuing and will pursue and dance with for the rest of my life. And it's this beautiful mystery. But a couple of the things that arise is that if you feel into the intelligence of your body, specifically in the intelligence of your nervous system, which you could actually make the argument is your body, but because we live in a culture where we've disassociated our minds from our bodies, that might be new to some people. But you can actually look at the structure of the brainstem as a map of our evolutionary history of consciousness. And that at the very base of the brain, that's kind of where our primal reflexes live, and they're also embedded in our spinal cord and all the nerves that go through there. And then we start to get these parts of the brain that grow on top and on top. And the youngest part of the brain, the part that is furthest from the brainstem, is the prefrontal cortex. This is the part where we have our sense of self. This is the part where we do rational thought. This is the part that I've overexerted staring at my books and my screens for the last couple of weeks. And that in evolutionary time, we've only had that for a blink of an eye. And that for millions of years, we've had an intelligence in our body that has allowed us to navigate the harsh environments that we've evolved in. It's allowed us to be in communion with other animals that try to eat us, that we try to eat. And it's allowed us to create social groups that we've been a part of for hundreds of thousands of years before we even got language. And so there's this intelligence inside of you that is millions of years old, that doesn't communicate in language, but communicates through the felt sense and also communicates through images. because how are we navigating reality for millions of years? Our vision in our eyes and the emotions in our body. And that when you go to sleep, your brain actually becomes more active than your default mode if you're just like driving your car. And it feels like that animal intelligence that's millions of years old is watching your life with you all the time. Every person who walks through your field, you are downloading a massive amount of information that is not conscious. And because we don't have many practices in our waking life that allows us to access that, it explodes forth in our dreams. And I believe that the Daemon, on some level, is that body intelligence. And so one of the primary ways that the Daemon will speak to you is through the dream state. And if you want to take it another level weirder, I know
always.
You do, yes, is that if we are all of nature, there's this idea of the collective unconscious, for lack of a better word. But on one level, everything that's organic, that's on this earth, is living tendrils of the central being that is Gaia. And so your dreams can also come from the intelligence of Gaia. Your dreams can also be connected to any other living organism on this planet. And that, if there's a ripple in the fabric over here, and it's for you in some specific way, it can ring a ding ding in your dreams. And one of my, I truly believe that one of the most effective ways to be in accord with your Daemon is to learn how to dance with your dreams. And yeah, that's kind of what comes up.
What if we do have it all reversed? And what if the whole game is that space we enter in our dreams that's really in touch with something bigger? What if dreaming and being asleep has such a connotation? We've demonized it so much, or something that wants to control us has demonized being asleep so much that we're missing the point. And the point is to really get in to that space and start dreaming while we're awake. Bring everything from that space, allow it to become conscious. Because what's happening in the dream state is, like you said, we're getting all these symbols. Emotions are very palpable. You can wake up with your heart racing from a dream. Oh my gosh, that felt so real. You're feeling the physical embodiment in that space, in that container. What if we can become more and more and more aware of the things that for each one of us as an individual is reverberating just under the surface? We bring those to light and we wake up into the world carrying that immense, endless, infinite knowledge. And that's how we do Game B. Food for thought.
I love you. And there's a couple of things that arise. A part of me is yes, yes, yes. And there's also a part of me that is there's uncomfortable, maybe it's too much to say truths, but deep intuitions that I have about how dreams operate and how biology operates, which is that there's different types of dreams. And it feels like if your meat suit, so a big part of what creates your dreams are the programs that your genes have acquired through the evolutionary process to emotionally instill in you, so you will act in such a way that will ensure your survival long enough to reproduce, and then to reproduce in such a way that gives the best chance to your offsprings to be able to survive and reproduce.
Right.
And so it feels like dreams can be a way to Game B if one learns what Game A wants. And so one of the reasons why I feel the call that I feel to learn consciously, egoically, for lack of a better word, the patterns of game A is so they're not hijacked in attempting to play game B. And so just to give like a clear example, people who are just kind of beginning to do the work of trying to liberate their conscious thought from the gene programmed emotions and instincts, one of the most common type of dreams is they're being chased. And what they do in the dream is they're afraid and they run. And that's almost always a representation of there is something in your life that you're afraid of. And your energetic disposition to it in your waking life is, I'm not going to look at it. Right. I'm going to run from it. And you can either do things in the waking world that will transform how you dream, or you can actually do specific practices in the waking world that will change what you do in dreams, that will actually change the way that you interact to the problem in the waking world. And it's to turn around.
Right. Like lucid dreaming and the choice.
Exactly.
Right.
And like 100% of the time, the thing that feels like a monster or a murderer, if you can get to the point in the dream to turn around,
right,
it's a handicapped child or a elderly person that's somehow crippled, or someone that's wounded or hurt, or a little animal. And it's because those are symbols that represent aspects of yourself that you've cut off the nourishment of your awareness or acceptance or love from. And that there's also dreams that people in relationships get into fights about, where one of the people will have a dream that the other person's cheating. It's not a mythical download that you know that the other person is, it can be sometimes, and there's intricacies here that we could get into if you want, but often it's because your genes are sensing something from them where you don't feel safe. And so you're trying to symbolically figure out, why do I feel so unsafe?
Right. It's your own insecurity in some way. No judgment on that, but it's coming from within the individual who's having the dream most of the time.
And now what's interesting here is, so dreams don't fit a mathematical formula. That's not its nature. And so there's really fine nuance here. But what I have found through interpreting thousands of dreams is that you can often have prognostic literal dreams that tends to be only about the people that you are absolutely closest to. And that sometimes you may actually be picking up the energy that your partner is unfaithful, and that your ego is like, I don't want to look at this. I don't want to look at this. And you might have a dream where it is explicitly them cheating. But I've never experienced that personally. And almost always when I've interpreted other people's dreams, it's not that. But to get to the point about why I feel called to learn the patterns of game A to protect the manifestation of game B is that it's already happening. And it's something that I'm going to have to constantly be watching myself for. But there are people who will use the language of game B or whatever to get on bigger podcasts so they can get more downloads, so they can make more money, so they can go pursue the things that their ego is subtly trying to do through their status and their money and their power. There are ways to use the game B wording to, make someone be vulnerable with you who's not ready to be vulnerable with you, or to make someone give up power if they're your boss, or if they're somehow in a position of power so you can get more power. And there's this incredibly subtle watching that feels like if I only relaxed into the knowing of my dreams, that the chances of me succumbing to that trap feel high. And so there's this dichotomy of like, I've been gifted by whatever you want to call it to have this incredible ability to consume huge amounts of information, make connections, and then make it simple and then articulate it. And that say yes to that. And I also have a coping pattern where I will try to overdo that so I don't feel my feels. And you were great at helping me feel some of the feels here. And then also trying to balance that skill with the part that's harder for me, which is relax, boy. Smell the flower, kiss the lover, drink the coffee, take the fucking nap.
Yeah.
Feel the dream. And so that's what comes up when I hear the great insight that dreams, and I do think that I have an intuition, but it's that most of your dreams, if you imagine that the entirety of the living life force of Gaia is like a tree, and the furthest outreaches of each branch are the 7 or 8 billion individuals, you have a bunch of gunk on your branch. That's your personal trauma, your personal woundings and stories. And the majority of your dreams will be energy stuck in that part of the branch.
Yes.
But as you do the work of clearing your part of the branch, you can become a channel where the root on the furthest opposite side that might be connected to a part of the land that's being eviscerated by, over deforestation or whatever, might be able to send a ripple through the whole tree and ping you. And then you might have this dream where you're like, wow, I'm really called to go to Peru and I don't even know why.
Right.
And then that might lead you on this adventure where you become a steward for that part of the root. And what that core brings up for me is it's like kind of the really wide lens view of this game B idea is that we seem to be the first emanation of the tree of life that has the ability to potentially become a steward for the entire tree. That every other organism, and there's some technicalities here about like how plants have evolved and how animals have evolved, but all the animals have evolved to essentially, it's about my branch. And if you want to go get evidence, just go watch Nature is Metal on Instagram. If you have ideas that animals are just beautiful in harmony, blah, blah, blah. But that we might be the first time in evolutionary history on this planet where a part of it can become self-aware enough to look at the entire tree and the soil around the tree and be like, how can we, instead of being finite agents competing for resources to grow our branch a little bit more, how can we become stewards for the entire tree?
Right. I agree. But I would argue that we have been there before and that we've lost our way and that we've forgotten. And I think part of what's so confronting for people, myself included, is like, where's that line of living awake with your heart open to the disproportionate amount of suffering and allowing that to course through our bodies, not to stick there, but to be processed, and then to create our offering. Because when I was hearing you tell the stories about people in the spiritual community and you delivering what you're working on and sort of the resistance to opening to it because of how it would confront them to recalibrate their lives, it's like, I get that so viscerally. I think that that's pervasive, and it's because change is scary and that threatens all those survival programs. And that's what I'm talking about too when I'm talking about dreams and us bringing what's there to consciousness. And when we talk about saying yes to something, I want to be clear about this. Saying yes to a feeling, saying yes to a dream doesn't mean I like this. Right. And I think that's an important nuance. It's not like, yes, more of this. It means like, this too is allowed as part of my experience. And I will let it pass through me. When you were talking about turning around and seeing that the scary thing chasing you in the dreams, not actually what we thought. And that bravery of turning toward to face reminded me of what I was learning when we went to go drink ayahuasca for the first time. And it was talking about, you might have images come up that are like a dragon and everything in your body saying, I don't want this dragon to kill me. Oh my gosh, this is real. I'm about to get burned up. And the nervous system, the body, the entire thing just is like collapsing in this cascade of hormones and fear. But the challenge is, just like the dream and looking over your shoulder to see what's really there, is to just like step toward it, right? Like, I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, but like stepping into and putting your head in the dragon's mouth and seeing that like nothing can hurt you that isn't you. Like it's all a reflection of something going on inside. So when I'm talking about making our dreams conscious, I'm not saying, oh, this literal thing happened in my dream and now that's actually going to happen in waking state. I'm saying there are cosmic breadcrumbs. There are clues to what your next level of the work is sprinkled into your dreams. And if you can take a pragmatic look at it, right? So like, even if the dream is highly emotional, to just step back like a scientist and go, what was going on here? Oh, interesting. That version of me within this layer was acting this way. Does that resonate with me? Is there any place in my life that I'm currently doing that or something like that? Or I know you and I have done a little bit of dream interpretation together, and you'll say, okay, well, so what does that person in your dream represent to you? Because like you have a dream about someone you haven't seen in 5 years, or like, that was so strange. Why were they in my dream? It might not be about the literal person.
Almost never.
Almost never. It's whatever especially if it's somebody pretty far removed from your circle, they usually represent a pretty surface level archetype. Yeah. It's like your immediate snap judgment of them, whether positive or negative. That's what's being shown to you. So I'm saying, let's collect those things by having a conscious, dream journaling practice, and sit with them and allow them to be the teachers for what needs to be cleared out karmically for all of us to move toward that next version of living in unity.
Yeah, the thing that I can feel arise is that, like, the place to start for anyone really is, it feels like you, and this is now getting into Bill Plotkin's work, which is someone that I've been super excited about, that was actually the doorway to me begin to relax the disassociation between me and nature. Is he has this developmental model of the human psyche that is the best I've ever seen, and as a nerd of psychology, I've read and tried to absorb all the classic models of development, and almost all of them are anchored into like the transition that happens at specific ages. His is unique, where there's transitions only when psychic tasks are completed, and that you can be a 40-year-old and still be in adolescence. And he actually makes the argument that almost everyone in power are still in the adolescent stage and they haven't completed the task of adolescence. And that kind of the core of adolescence is to find your authentic place in game A. It's to actually achieve the dreams that you had when you were an adolescent. You're like, I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z. And that once you find that authentic place within a peer group that's embedded in a Sikh culture, which is actually a part of the development that's required for people in this time, that's when your ego gets solid enough where your soul can come in. And the way I use Daemon is how he uses soul. And there's an interesting articulation that he puts forth that I love, and it's that soul is not a spiritual phenomenon. It's an ecological phenomenon. That your soul is your innate knowing that every organism on this planet has about how to be in harmony with Gaia. And that because our culture is fundamentally out of harmony, once you get to the point where you've achieved the ego goal, and in a healthy culture, that would be like 20, but in like an unhealthy culture, most people die before they do. That's when your soul's like, oh, the caterpillar's ready.
Right.
We're going to start.
There's more.
We're going to start weaving the cocoon.
Right.
And that, it's so funny, but when I was reading his work, one of the things he articulates in the book is that whenever I present this model to people, everyone thinks that they've already gone through the transition from caterpillar to butterfly. and almost none of them have, that a caterpillar goes through different stages of molting, which is it gets too big for its shell and it goes through like a rupturing and it's reborn, but it's still a caterpillar. When I was reading his book, I was like, wow, I've done such a good job. I feel like I went through my butterfly moment when I was 19 and 20 and I had that really hard time in my life and I started journaling. And it wasn't until after I finished the book and I started to like teach it to some of the people that I knew or some of the groups that I'm a part of, where I started to hear this voice. And it was like my Daemon. It was like, oh, buddy. And it feels like I'm actively at the beginning of my, what he calls your descent into soul, which like I was feeling into a couple weeks ago. Like I just launched the Dharma Journal and I was really feeling into like, I was driving back from getting dinner with a beautiful woman and I was in my Tesla and it was going down the road. And I had this like, oh God, when I was 19 and 20 and I was in the library every weekend while I was working at Chipotle, the dream I had for my life as like making it was I would have online courses that would pay my bills. I would be driving a Tesla. I would live in Austin and I would have like a body that I was happy with.
Yeah.
What I realized a couple weeks ago when I wrote my newsletter was,
Yeah.
I've got what I wanted.
Right.
And because of the Bill Plotkin, I was like, something's coming. And it's funny, I can actually go back and look at a newsletter I wrote a month ago. And that's exactly what I was feeling. And so I feel like I'm in the beginning of my descent, and there's a part of me that's terrified. There's a part of me that's excited. But the reason I went on that tangent is it feels like the first stage that you can relax into if you're starting to get this sense of like something is wrong is it's actually a natural and required part of your development to play game A to the point where you realize whatever your Daemon came in through to you when you were 18 and 19 and 20 to go get that thing. And it's once you get that thing, don't worry, your Daemon's going to take care of you. That's when you're going to be called into this transformation. And that the two fundamental aspects to complete adolescence, it feels like doing trauma work on your body. And, you know, if you're interested, what is trauma? Go check out that podcast. But that feels like that's one of the cores that's required to even be a fit Game B player. And the other one is, for lack of a better word, but like doing internal family systems work. But it's to find all these disparate parts of you that are coming to you through your dreams and slowly begin to become aware of them, have conversations with them, and then integrate them. And doing those two parts while you go fucking make your money and do your thing will develop the caterpillar enough where you can get to the point where the Daemon will come and will kill you.
You just mentioned the Dharma Journal, which, by the way, congratulations. I know that you were working on that for quite some time.
Yep.
Do you want to speak to what that is and how that was a labor of love for you? And
yeah. So it is interesting to feel into the cosmic winking circular nature of our becoming, that I've created this tool, launched it, and haven't used it. And that it's literally what I need right now. And that the core of the Dharma Journal is it's a set of guided meditations over 7 days that will help you viscerally, through the language of dreams, which is emotions and images, connect to your Daemon in a scarily visceral way, because if you've been ignoring it, it's about to get amplified. And then creating an inner temple that you can go into every day to get the sacred message of what's my one thing to do today. And that by the time you get to the end of the Dharma Journal, there's a daily meditation that you can use that's 11 minutes long that I haven't fucking used once since I've launched it, that will help you relax into what is the one sacred task for today. And then the program that the Dharma Journal is on is you'll have your own personal, very sexy, like place to talk to yourself, write down what the sacred task is, and do it.
So where can people find that?
TheDharmaJournal.com.
Amazing. As we come to the denouement of this conversation, what's on your heart?
The tension of a juxtaposition between overwhelm, fear, sadness, inadequacy, shame, guilt, hopelessness, actively alive alongside the deepest fulfillment, excitement, joy, love, awe, faith, knowing, and this feeling of that I can feel that second part, but I'm in the first part, and I know the second part is there, actively alive right now, and struggling with the grace of knowing that I am out of balance with a narrow perspective currently. And hearing my soul giggle.
That is such a powerful testament, again, to who you are. I want to say that. First of all, for you to be able to tap into that within your own body at the drop of a hat and to unearth all of that. And second, to have the bravery to express it is profound in and of itself. And for me, that's what I really call multidimensional emotional mastery. And for me, that's the idea of these things can all exist. They can all run on parallel or not parallel tracks in all directions. These emotions can all be there together like a family, coexisting. None of them are right or wrong or preferential. They can all live inside of us. And I was sitting in meditation the other day. Some stuff was coming up for me around deepening into relationship, romantic relationship, and what is required to cross the threshold into the next realm. Like that level of love that it's like it terrifies you because you are so open and transparent with every aspect of your beingness. And the insight I had was there is always fear. The goal is not to get rid of fear. Fear is a very, very important part of our experience. It's to turn toward the fear, to say, I see you. You can stay here, but I'm going to go this way. I'm going to choose this anyway, even with this in the background. That's a courageous act, because for there to be courage, there needs to be fear, or else the act itself didn't require any courage.
Right.
So on the other side of that is where all the most beautiful things in our life happen
Yeah.
is when we see the fear, we feel it. We don't turn away from it. We bring it in as part of the family and we take the very next step. And I see that in you. Thank you.
And thank you for creating a space on this podcast for me where every time I feel completely safe to be vulnerable and be emotional. And you have a gift for calling that out of me. So thank you.
I love you.
I love you.
Where can people find you online?
Erick Godsey on Instagram. My website is erickgodsey.com. The podcast is The Myths That Make Us. And maybe in your dreams.
Thank you. Until next time.
Until next time, thank you.